Air India is the flag carrier of India and is the main long-haul airline in the country, and they're a mess, which is very much a shame because they used to be one of the best airlines in the world in the 20th century. Nowadays, their reputation has basically gone all the way to hell, and they've been falling behind for several decades now under government ownership. Nowadays, though, they're under new ownership under the Tatas, and they quickly began putting Air India on a path to recovery from decades of neglect and misery. They have many challenges that they're going to be dealing with during their path to recovery. These challenges date back to decades of mismanagement from the Indian government. But things got especially bad as the Indian aviation market was deregularized in the 1990s, and even worse when the Indian government merged Air India with Indian Airlines in 2007. Air India being the long-haul international airline, while Indian Airlines was the domestic operator. Air India's losses grew exponentially, the airline kept losing market share, and they had to cut multiple routes, and competition was getting very fierce around the time of the merger. Among these competitors are included low-cost airlines that have taken over the growing market in India, especially because Indians tend to be very price sensitive when it comes to flying. But it's not just that. The international competition is just as fierce, if not more. Many passengers prefer the better service offered by Middle Eastern and European carriers, oftentimes with a lower price than they would get with a direct flight on Air India. But even then, most of Air India's flights fly out of Delhi, with very limited flights out of other cities like Mumbai, especially long-haul flights, which means the passengers would need to make a connection in Delhi anyway before continuing to their final destinations, and since Emirates, Qatar, and Singapore Airlines already fly to multiple smaller cities in India, I'm pretty sure that many passengers prefer to just transfer via these hubs in the Middle East and Southeast Asia rather than via Delhi. Especially because these airlines already fly to a lot of destinations that Air India doesn't fly to, and even if Air India does fly to these places, passengers will have to transit via Delhi, which might oftentimes be convenient, but when Emirates, Qatar, and Etihad also manage to fly to smaller cities in India, that's where Air India gets into trouble because it means that passengers are able to choose between either transit through Delhi or through one of the Middle Eastern hubs. Just for comparison, Emirates and FlyDubai combined fly to 11 cities in India, Qatar flies to 12, and Turkish Airlines only flies to Delhi and Mumbai. In Europe, Emirates flies to 66 cities, Qatar flies to 40, and Turkish Airlines flies to 94, versus Air India, which only flies to 4. While in North America, Emirates flies to 14 cities, Qatar flies to 13, and Turkish Airlines flies to 18, while Air India only flies to 7. On the other side, Singapore flies to multiple cities in Australia, while Air India only flies to 2. The importance of the North American market is very evident because there are 3.4 million Indians living in the US and 1.3 million living in Canada. The UK is also very important with 1.4 million Indians. Other important long-haul markets with significant Indian populations include Germany, Australia, South Africa, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and many more. And while even though this isn't a long haul, you can't forget the UAE, with the largest Indian population outside of India, with 3.5 million Indians. Many other Middle Eastern countries also have significant Indian diaspora, including Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. And they all have significant number of short-haul flights with the A320, A321, the 787, as well as the Boeing 737 operated by Air India Express. One of the big problems that Air India has is being too far from many of these very important markets. Flying to Europe can take at least 8 hours. Flying to Tokyo, Japan takes at least 7 hours. Sure, some important markets are close like the UAE, Qatar, Singapore, and Hong Kong, but you still can't deny the very high importance of North American and European markets for the airline, especially the US and the UK. The Indian market is very important for many airlines as well, but they can do fine with only one flight in the country, such as American Airlines, which only flies to New York JFK, United, which flies to 4 routes from Newark, Chicago, and San Francisco to Delhi and Mumbai. Both airlines are planning to start flying to Bangalore soon as well. Air Canada flies to Delhi from Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, but it's going to start soon from Toronto to Montreal via London Heathrow, while many European airlines fly to several cities in India and offer connections at their hubs in Europe. But Air India does have one advantage in these markets, and it's that Air India is still able to fly through Russian airspace, which is very important to shorten the travel time between India and the US, while their European and North American counterparts often have to add up to an hour to two to their flights because of the bans. But looking at the airline's long-haul destinations, the airline has 4 destinations in Europe, including London, Paris, Birmingham, and Frankfurt. London being the main hub for Air India's European flying there from 7 Indian cities, likely because of the huge Indian diaspora there is currently in the UK, especially in the London area. There is also a flight to Birmingham from Amritsar, likely thanks to the Punjabi population in the area. There are also flights to Paris and Frankfurt from Delhi. The airline also has 66 weekly flights to North America, which includes 7 routes from Delhi and 1 from Mumbai. What's even more helpful in this is the fact that Air India has a closure agreement with both United and Air Canada, and the airline flies to multiple of their hubs, including Newark, Washington Dulles, Chicago, San Francisco, Toronto, and Vancouver. Other long-haul flights include flights to Shanghai, which are currently suspended, Tokyo Narita, Seoul, Incheon, Melbourne, and Sydney, all of which got flights from Delhi, and then there's also Nairobi, which has flights from Mumbai and Ahmedabad. The aircraft that Air India uses for all these routes include 3 of the Boeing 777-200 LRs, which are currently used on flights to San Francisco. Air India is also planning on leasing another 5 777-200 LRs, but I'll talk about that later. They also have 13 of the Boeing 777-300 ERs. This is Air India's highest capacity aircraft after the retirement of the Boeing 747-400, and they fly to other North American destinations, to New York, Chicago, Toronto, Vancouver, and New York JFK. And lastly, Air India has 27 of the Boeing 787-8s. This is the airline's smallest widebody that flies to all of Air India's flights to Europe, Australia, East Asia, Nairobi, and Washington Dulles. These also fly some shorter haul flights to Dubai, Bangkok, Singapore, Hong Kong, and some domestic flights. The airline obviously has a lot of wide bodies, but somehow it's not enough. The demand from India to the US, to Europe, and many other places is so huge. And now that the Tatas are in control of the airline, they don't have to necessarily go by government interest to run the airline. They can basically do what they want, and they can do whatever changes they deem necessary in order for the airline to finally turn a profit, but also get back the reputation they used to have as an airline that Indians can fly on and a flag carrier that Indians can be proud of. Because of this, Air India is introducing 5 of the 777-200 LRs that were retired by Delta in 2020, mainly so that they can retire and sell their current 777-200 LRs, but also using them to launch the flights from Hyderabad to Chicago O'Hare, Bangalore to San Francisco, and Mumbai to both San Francisco and New York JFK. They also want to bring back the aircraft that were grounded during the pandemic and add more frequencies to existing routes, and they're also leasing about 30 narrow-body aircraft as well. There are rumors that Air India plans to add new planes into their fleet, including the Airbus A350-900, to replace the Boeing 777, as well as plans to add new flights to new destinations in North America, which now seems to be one of their biggest focus. But if that's the case, then why is Air India adding more 777s to the fleet? Well, I think that the 777s are for the short term. Air India wants to be able to expand immediately, so they're releasing the first aircraft they can get their hands on, hence the 777s. They'll probably keep the 777s for now until they can get their hands on any A350s, which may take a while to be delivered to Air India, probably a few years' time, and Air India just can't wait that long to launch the new services. What about other aircraft? Well, if there's any aircraft that I think Air India should order, as I mentioned before, it's about 20 of the Airbus A350-900s that could likely be flying the ultra-long-haul flights to the United States and Canada, for which the range would be very helpful, maybe a couple flying to the UK from Delhi and Mumbai, and some domestic shorter-haul flights maybe. The Boeing 787-9 could also be another option for Air India, being a middle ground between the 787-8 and the A350-900. It could be a good option for new long-haul destinations, and it could obviously fly on existing routes that might be too large for the 787-8, but too small for the A350, such as a couple of North American destinations, European cities, probably also Sydney, Singapore, Bangkok, and Tokyo. Maybe Dubai as well. But how about new long-haul destinations? Which destinations could Air India open up soon? Air India has been talking about adding new destinations in the US that they want to fly to. For example, the US routes that I mentioned before, but they haven't been able to add any of these because of the lack of funds and the lack of planes. These destinations include Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Seattle, and Boston. Houston doesn't just have a sizable Indian population, but it's also a United Airlines hub, which can offer many connections, while the other 5 simply have a large Indian population, and I'm sure a 787-9 or an A350-900 could definitely help with that. Other US routes that I could see happening could be Mumbai to Chicago, Bangalore to Newark, maybe a route from Chennai or other Indian cities depending on the demand. I could also see Delhi to Montreal, but maybe also Mumbai to Toronto or Bangalore to Vancouver. Air India hasn't talked much about expansion in other regions, but I can see some improvements in other areas, such as increasing capacity in markets such as London Heathrow from Delhi, Mumbai, and other cities by flying larger aircraft and more frequencies, as well as an upgrade on the Emirates Star to Birmingham routes to daily flights. I can also see the possibility of new destinations in Europe such as Amsterdam, Manchester, London Gatwick, or Stansted as a secondary gateway into London, and maybe Birmingham to Delhi and other destinations. Air India could possibly stand to have more capacity towards East Asia, to Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and other places as well. I'm pretty sure that Air India Star Alliance membership will also be helpful in Air India's recovery, whether it's by partner airlines flying to India or Air India flying to Star Alliance hubs such as Zurich, Vienna, Copenhagen, and many other cities. Air India has mentioned they want to build up several hubs in the country, and I would assume that this means adding more long-haul flights out of other cities outside of Delhi, like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, or Hyderabad. Besides the flights that are currently scheduled to be launched, Air India could possibly resume flights such as Mumbai to Sydney, and maybe adding flights to Perth from one of the India's southern hubs, which are likely much better located for Australia flights in comparison to Delhi being further north. Meanwhile, Air India could also resume flights to Mauritius and to South Africa from Mumbai. One problem with adding more flights, though, would be the current lack of capacity at Mumbai's international airport, which has only one operating runway. But in a few years, Mumbai is going to have the potential to become a mega hub for the airline once the new airport is completed, especially since Mumbai is a very important financial hub for the country. I don't really know. I'm mostly speculating on what could possibly happen for the airline with a new ownership under the Tatas. There have been some rumors about a merger with Vistara and AirAsia, which are both owned by the Tatas as well, which could also bring the Boeing 787-9 to the airline and more of the domestic market share, though I'm not sure if that's going to end up happening. Air India does have many challenges though, such as the competition with other airlines like the low-cost airlines in the short-haul markets, Middle Eastern Airlines, Singapore Airlines, and many other airlines that already fly to India. But I think that India does have the potential to become a dominant force once again in the international market, especially as India still seems to be on a path towards economic growth in the future years. And especially as their middle class keeps growing, and so does their long haul demand, if they take advantage of all of their competitive advantages, they can absolutely turn their fortunes around and become the great airline that we all want to see Air India become. Thanks for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If y'all got any questions, feedback, comments, or any suggestions, y'all can leave a comment. That's all I got to say, and I'll see y'all later.